You're listening to the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and it's time for this week's Long Island News, the show that talks to newsmakers and other important people from Nassau and Suffolk County that matter to Long Island and Long Islanders like you. So each week we'll have a conversation about issues that affect all of us. I live on Long Island like you, and I want to know more about the people making the big decisions that affect all of us. And this week, we're going to learn about the leadership in the Democratic Party and what their thought process is going into the 2024 elections. My guest today is Jay Jacobs, chairman of the state and Nassau Democratic Committees. Mr. Jacobs, welcome back to this week's Long Island News.
Well, thanks for having me again.
Let's jump right into it. All eyes are on November, and it looks like obviously a rematch between Biden and Trump. And obviously you're supporting Biden. But what are your thoughts and the thoughts of the party going into November?
Well, I'm optimistic. I really think that, when we get closer to the election and people begin paying more and more attention, I think it's going to become a lot easier of a choice for people to make. Now, I know that right now it's complicated, and there are a lot of things complicating the political environment, not the least of which is what's going on in the Middle East. But, you also have economic issues. And of course, there's a lot of misinformation, that people are subjected to on social media and the like. And a campaign is going to spend a lot of money, I guess both sides will, to try to break through all of that and get, some clarity in the political environment, let people understand what exactly Joe Biden has been doing over the past three and a half years as president and how that benefits them. So I believe that when people see that and we cut through all of the nonsense, there's going to be a lot more enthusiasm for him. And I'm feeling very confident about that. Well,
that's quite an uphill job, though. I think, the propaganda, that's a big issue that I guess we've had our brushes with it as far as historically, but this seems to be, it's really a tool that's being not only used, but abused, to the point where two people can come together in a conversation and they both have different facts. Mm-hmm. And so there's no meeting of the minds.
Yeah, well, I think that, we've always seen division in American politics. I do like to read a lot of history. And, you can go back to before the Civil War, and of course, certainly the Civil War. And then after the Civil War, there have always been these harsh divisions. There's always been a lot of vitriol. People hated Franklin Roosevelt in the early 30s and throughout the 30s until the war. And so, nothing different there. What's different now, of course, is the impact and the just the overwhelming presence of social media and the technology that comes in. And what's happened here, I think, in this day and age, and the public was I think probably ready for this in a negative way. You've got this divide based on social issues, based on your position economically and socially, as you see yourself in this country. And you add to that the precipitous decline in civics, in actual basic knowledge among young people. While they may have picked up in science and math, we've really dropped the ball on history and social studies and understanding, what this country has been through, what the past is all about. I hear it a lot, even in the debate and the discourse over what's going on in the Middle East. There's such a lack of understanding of history and what's caused this. And I think you need to understand history, understand what's happened before to get a better understanding of, how we move forward in a positive way. So you solve problems. And that's, that extends across the whole gamut of issues.
Yeah. It doesn't seem, though, that it's on the upswing to the positive. It seems more now you've got state lawmakers in public schools making laws about what can be taught. It's just some of the things are wild.
You talk to some people and you listen to people, and I do a lot of listening, and I have to tell you, I just, it's perplexing to me. I can't, on the one hand, when you're angry, you want to think they're just stupid, but it's not that.
No.
It's not that at all. It's not even that they're uninformed. It's just that they're misinformed and in many respects, and misinformed with such intensity in social media that it's almost close to brainwashing for some people. Mm-hmm. There is a smaller and smaller middle of the road. You've got people who are tuned in to MSNBC on one side and Fox on the other side. Mm-hmm. And, and then of course you've got other news outlets and then social media. So people go to where they want to hear news that makes them feel good about what they're thinking in the first place, to reinforce their pre-existing narratives. That's not healthy.
Yeah,
that's not healthy.
An echo chamber, which is what it turns into. Some would say that was purposeful, that beginning in the late 70s or whenever that happened. We called it civics classes, and then they made it social studies, and it became a little more benign. It wasn't all the history either. I mean, I didn't know anything about 1921 Tulsa when I went all through school. They never taught it. They never taught that there was a massacre there of people who were doing well. We never got to see that picture.
Right.
Those things alone, people don't know how a bill is made. And I've said this to more than one guest that I've had on the show. If you go out in the street and ask people who their state senators are, the majority of them don't know. And that's just two people they had to remember.
They don't know the difference between state senators and United States senators. They don't have that knowledge. No,
and that's it. Well, George Carlin said it a long time ago. The average man is 50%. And the average man is not really brilliant. And if you think about it, the rest, half of the country is below that average man. So, but you said it when people start to pay more attention.
Yeah.
And you guys, I feel sorry for you guys because you're grinding at this all year. And then, there's that part of time where that's all the conversation is. And then it goes away again after people get elected and everybody goes back into their boroughs and forgets, But anyway, so now recently you claimed a victory when Tom Suozzi won the special election in the 3rd District over Republican Mazi Pilip. And he's now up for re-election, this November already. And he has a new opponent. What can you tell us about this race?
Well, I think it's going to be a little easier for two reasons. First reason is the redistricting has taken Massapequa out of his district. Massapequa is a heavily Republican area. It's also put into his district a good portion of Huntington. That's a Democratic area. So where this district was a bit more purple, if you will, it's moved significantly blue. So that, on the first instance, makes life a little easier for Tom Suozzi's reelection. Secondarily, you're in a presidential election. And the turnout is going to be very high, I would say in the low to mid 70s, whereas typical turnout in a gubernatorial year runs, in the high 50s to 60%. And of course, special election was well lower than that. Mm-hmm. So I think Tom's in a pretty good shape, a pretty good place, I should say, going into the 2024 election. That doesn't mean you take it for granted. That doesn't mean you get overconfident. You run a good campaign, you raise your money, and you have your messaging, and I think he'll do well.
Yeah, we've had Tom on quite a few times, and always has a good message, and he's very upbeat. I always look at a politician like that, and say, you must be worn down. And no, he comes in, and I got to give him that. So what are Tom Suozzi's goals for November? It's not much time to get much done, but what are you hoping that maybe he can pass through?
Well, I'm hoping we get the Ukraine aid passed. I mean, I think that's critical at this point. I don't think, so many people don't really understand the ramifications of not passing that Ukraine aid bill and of the consequences to Ukraine itself, and to the people of Ukraine, to NATO, to our European allies, to the entire world. I will tell you this, people don't understand that there's a direct connection between what happens in the Ukraine and what the United States does and whether the island of Taiwan survives in the future, and that's across the whole way across the world. They don't even understand that.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important. So for me, going in an election year when you don't expect the Congress to get very much done, and they certainly haven't gotten very much done the rest of their time in office because of the Republican mess that we've had. But I will tell you this: I think it's imperative we get that Ukraine aid bill passed.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I got to do some business quick. You're listening to this week's Long Island News on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and my guest today is Jay Jacobs, chairman of the State and Nassau Democratic Committees. It's pretty wild how aid to the Ukraine can actually be directly affecting the well-being of American citizens in the long run. There's a trend here and it just seems to be in general. We got Donald Trump. He loves Viktor Orban, and he loves Vladimir Putin. All these right-wing, and I get this sense and this feeling just as a citizen of the country that we're being pushed in that direction, whether we like it or not. The dangerous thing about social media is the logarithms that are foisted on the people and determine what you get to see and what you don't get to see. Why haven't we done anything about stations like Fox News, blatantly lying continuously? Now, people talk about the Fairness Act, but that wouldn't fix this. The Fairness Act just means you got to have the opposing side come on TV and tell their set of lies. And then the other side can come in and tell their set of lies. And you've satisfied the law. But what we're talking about is people. You can't just go on the air and say what you want, but they can, and they do, and they can. People have made careers and become celebrities spouting this crap. Is all I can say. What do we do about that? And
the problem you have is the First Amendment, and I would say to you that the dilemma on the one end is our strength on the other. So it's hard. Very hard to navigate this because, who is going to be the arbiter of truth?
Right.
And that becomes our complication. That becomes what's difficult. And I would say to you that our obligation, I think, as citizens has got to be to take responsibility and to understand that each of us has to step back and understand the importance of democracy first, and the protection of what our rights are and all the rest of it. And then, we can begin asking some tough questions of some of these media outlets and social media and the rest. This is going to have to get cleaned up. And now you add to the equation AI, and it's an explosion of misinformation potentially.
Yes.
So
I think we can still
ahead of us.
Yeah. At this point in time, I think the human being can still discern kind of what's AI and what isn't. It hasn't been perfected yet, but the minute it goes, there's going to be that day when you're talking on the phone to somebody and you'll be 15 minutes into the conversation and finally it'll dawn on you that you're speaking to a machine.
That's right.
Right now, you can kind of tell by the words it picks and some of the things it does. It's a little wonky. So, no, that's an AI. Even the pictures. Our eye has an incredible ability to pick up something that doesn't belong. But you're right. It's going to get scary. People say, how am I going to feel about AI? And my first answer is, you're going to love it. And I say, well, why is that? Because it's going to be geared to your limbic system, to your likes and your dislikes, and it knows everything you love, and it will say just the right words to get you to go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning and live a blissful existence all the while somebody's probably stealing your wallet.
Right.
It's a scary idea. And once we let it out of the box, it's kind of like Pandora. The only thing left is hope. Everything else is out there. There are so many things like that. Just the system in the United States, in the government. We've got a group of leaders who get their money for campaigns from the people they're supposed to be overseeing.
Right.
I look at consumer protections, and they've really been eroded Does anybody read when you get your new Apple phone? Did you read the? No, nobody reads it. We just say
Nobody reads
accept
that.
and we
Right.
go. Right.
Right.
I have a problem with the way laws are written. I think laws should be written so that 50% guy in the United States, he should be able to understand what it means.
How about it be good if the members of Congress who passed the law understood it?
Well, how about if they read it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And something else, people don't, they write all these laws, and it's the state too, and federal government, and nobody focuses on the unintended consequences.
Bingo. We had a whole show on that. Yes. Beautiful. You're right. And I would love to see them have at least a committee that reviews a law and says, well, wait a minute, you know what this can mean? You know, 2 weeks down the road, we're going to have this and we're going to have that. It's so true.
Right.
It's kind of scary. But so we have a system that's set up. I mean, how do you feel about public funding of elections?
Well, I was I was on the commission, the state commission on campaign finance. I actually took the lead on that commission. There was no chair, but I took the lead and helped organize it and helped push through many of the campaign finance rules that we now have in place that were actually adopted by the legislature, signed by the governor after the commission's report. The commission's report was accepted in its entirety. So I've been an advocate for that, and I think there's a balance. I think that you've got to give challengers a way to compete with big money. I also think that Citizens United, the Supreme Court case, which allowed for these independent expenditure groups spending wild amounts of money under the auspices or the title of free speech, is nonsensical in an election. I think that there's a public interest in having free and fair elections, and fair elections means somewhat equivalency, if not equality, of resources being able to be spent on getting your message, your argument out to the voters before they make a decision. I don't know how you call it a fair election if someone has $10 million to spend on TV and every place else to tell their voters their view, while their opponent has $2,000 to spend. Well, that's not a fair election, and I'm not even so sure if you can call it free. So I believe very strongly that we've got to change the rules. I think that the lobbying money, the corporate money that goes into campaigns at times can have a very negative impact on the outcome of laws. I don't believe that someone takes a campaign contribution and there's a quid pro quo, but I will tell you that it certainly is on your mind if you're an elected official and you need to get reelected, that someone may be a big donor. And so it's a very complicated situation, and there are I wouldn't go to one extreme or the other, but it does need fixing.
Yeah. Oh, it needs attention, definitely. One of the scary things, especially this election, this November election, I think that we're getting perilously close to the point where we could actually lose our way of government. I don't know that people are, kind of aware of that, but the textbook, we just talked about consumer protections, and they're there's really nothing there. You buy a product from a company, and if you, just by buying the product, you're agreeing that if this company hurts or maims you, you have to go to an arbitrator of their choosing. Can't go to court. So many of those agreements have that. Why do we as the American people accept that kind of garbage? It's our fault. I'm going to take the blame for the populace because we let it happen.
The American electorate, for the most part, is uninformed on many of these issues, and that's the way certain interest groups prefer it. But you have to think about it. For most Americans, on a day-to-day basis, they're focused on making ends meet, getting their kids to school and back, and thinking about their kids' futures, and also recreationally, they're looking at their favorite sports teams. They know the stats real well, the teams they follow, but they don't know the budget of the United States. They don't know what their taxes are going to look like on the in the next couple of years, because they just aren't paying attention to these things. And, they never did. And people generally don't. It's that small group that do. That's where, your political leaders come in and the rest. And then if you add, this huge dose of dishonesty, which, is permeating the media and social, social networks on the internet and the rest, it's difficult for people to discern the truth and get themselves involved. And then I'll tell you this: so much of what you see and read in the papers or see on TV is so sickening and so disheartening that you just want to, and sometimes I feel this way, you just want to remove yourself from it and just live. What's going on in the rest of the world can just bring you down.
And I think that may be the reason
it's our obligation to not do that, because those are real people over there.
That may be its actual reason for being there, is to do exactly that. Yeah. We get tired of hearing Trump, and so many people just get so tired of one guy the other day on the radio said, I don't want to hear less of him. I want to hear more of him. I want people to hear the crap that comes out of his mouth, not to hear it from the third party reporter, not to hear it secondhand, to hear him say it. I mean, I'm the same. I can't stand the sound of his voice, but I think it's true. We need to see more of just who, the real, I would say person, I guess I'll have to, the real person is.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think as we get closer to the election, you're going to hear and see a lot more of Donald Trump. And I'm going to tell you something. He is, and I have to describe him as crazy. I mean, it's not even
not so crazy.
I know he's manipulative. I know to a degree he has an agenda that he's trying to do, and he's somewhat successful at it. I mean, I watched his little TV ad selling the Bible, which was just so ludicrous for a guy that's actually never even opened one.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Wow. But yet there are people who want to believe in that and they buy that. But if you listen to what he says sometimes, and if you're in the middle and you're not sure, and you listen to this guy, he's crazy.
Yeah, well,
and he goes off on tangents and gets off track at times. And I don't mean just just misses up people's names and things.
No.
That can happen, I suspect. But he actually says things which are they're frightening.
Well, I think he's on track, and I think he's crazy. I've never in my life heard immigrants referred to as vermin. Mm-hmm. Never.
Right.
Right. I was born 8 years after the end of World War II. So I never quite heard Hitler say it, but I know he did.
He did.
But he's the only one I ever heard say that. This is a scenario that's really scary. A lot of people say if we could just get rid of Donald Trump, everything would be good. And I say, no. Here's what we've got. And I'll use the biblical example. When you make a loaf of bread and you have bad yeast, you got a bad loaf now. And there's no way after that bread is baked to go in there and pick out the bad yeast. You got to throw the whole loaf away. The country is now, Congress just passed a law the other day that I thought was very enlightening. Somebody's got a plan 2025 or so. If Donald gets elected again, this is what they're going to do. And one of the things they're going to do is they're going to bet on all the people they've placed in positions in government that won't necessarily be leaving if he does. So there's your bad yeast. Mm-hmm. And it's through every department of government. Yeah. Now, when he first got on the stage and he was standing at the podium in Helsinki with Vladimir Putin, and he threw the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, the FBI, everybody under the bus. I believe Vladimir. I don't go much for these government institutions. And that was the beginning of the last 8 years of tirade. The real danger here is if he does get in, it'll be 10 times worse. But if he doesn't, we've still got the bad yeast to deal with.
I want people, particularly people who support Donald Trump, I want them to think about this and quietly, on their own time, just think about this. All right. If this guy was such a good president and will be such a good president again, that you want to vote for him, not just because your pocketbook is going to be thicker. You think, if you're earning a lot of money, people earn a lot of money like Trump because, he cut taxes for them and he gave them good financial breaks. But aside from that, aside from the selfish, So you think the guy was a good president, and he's going to be a good president? No, answer this question. Why is it then that there is no former Republican president, you got George Bush out there, no candidate, former Republican candidate for president, no former Republican candidate for vice president, other than Sarah Palin, who we all know was a genius.
Consider the source, yeah.
And the best, no Secretary of State that Donald Trump hired and said he was the smartest to hire the best people. He must have hired the best people. Well, there's no Secretary of State that he hired in his administration, no National Security Advisor, no Secretary of Defense, no CIA director, all right? And I can't think of no Treasury Secretary, no Attorney General that worked for Donald Trump that he picked, that were in his administration. None of these people are endorsing him this time, and most have come out and said, God, he cannot be president again.
Right.
So those people who he picked were closest to him, worked with him, all say he is unfit and dangerous to be our president. Then how does any citizen who does not have that connection sit there and say, well, you know what, in spite of all that, in spite of the fact he picked all of those people, and he said he was the best at picking them, I know better sitting in my home, he's going to be great for our country. How can you say that?
Got a good point. I think the other thing, not that your statement needed any adding, I think that's perfect. I'd put that on TV, just the way you said it right there. But also 91 criminal counts against him. And I think it's all of the witnesses are Republicans. They're all people from his side of the line.
Yeah, well, no, and Republican judges have ruled against him. So, but he can parse that. It's political. It's the witch hunt. It's they're allowed to get me. It's the deep state. It's the rest of it. Fine. He picked the attorneys general he picked his secretaries of state. He picked his generals. There are no generals that serve. There's no chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, commanding general of the Army, admiral of the Navy. None of those people is standing up and saying, yep, Donald Trump will be good for us.
Yeah.
And by the way, aside from the despots, go find a Democratic leader in this world today, NATO nation, British Prime Minister, the Chancellor in Germany. You find anyone who wants this guy back in this world. You can't find him. Yeah, Orban wants him. I would imagine that Putin would be happy, but come on, folks. This is an easy one.
Anytime you want to sit down someplace and just talk, I have a million questions, and I think I'll think of 2 million more when I leave the studio. My guest today has been Jay Jacobs, chairman of the State and Nassau Democratic Committees. And again, we want to thank you for taking the time to be here to speak with us. And as we get closer to the election, too, maybe we'll carve out another half hour somewhere, and you can tell me what kind of battles you're actually going through at the moment.
Be happy to.
But the clock on the wall says it's time for this week's Long Island News to get on out of here. I'm Bill McIntyre. Remember, you can listen to us by searching for this week's Long Island News wherever you listen to podcasts. And we're right here every Friday on the radio at 3 p.m. on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.